we can go ahead and get rolling. So hello everyone, and welcome to our digital event and panel discussion for today, where we are going to be talking about how to overcome pricing friction and improve the closing and renewal process. So the stuff is not only going to relate to new business, but also going to relate to renewals. And so we're going to make sure we cover the full end of the spectrum here. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Valm, CEO and co-founder of RevOps Co-op. We have a community, global community of 13,000 plus revenue operations folks from all across the globe. And we put on a whole slew of digital events, in-person events. We've got a Slack group, a newsletter, lots of different things there. And so if you're not a member of the community already, you can join. We have a free membership option. We'll throw that link in the chat. RevOpsCoop.com is how you can join that. And with me, I have Kevin Cragen, who is the Senior Director of Sales Operations over at Domo, and Alex Murphy, who is the Director of Customer Success on the enterprise side over at Capchase. And so, like I said, we're going to be talking about new business, new logo acquisition, and current business, current customers, the renewal process. But before we dive into the topic, I just want to ask one non-RevOps, non-professional related question, and then also have you add anything to the professional introduction. So Alex, I'm going to start with you. One, anything you want to add to the professional introduction? And then my question for both of you is, I'm curious, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream and why?
Oh, that's okay. So on the professional side of things, nothing to add there. But my favorite flavor of ice cream is chocolate chip cookie dough. And the reason why is because it is the perfect marriage of cookies and ice cream, which are my two favorite desserts anyway. So why not combine them into one?
I love that. That is that is a great explanation. And now, Kevin, we'll go on to you. Anything to add to the personal and professional introduction there, and then you as well. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
On the professional introduction side, I won't really add anything else there. I've done ops for a long time, and it's amazing how it just always evolves. So
yeah,
there's nothing else there. But on the ice cream, I'm a big lover of bunny tracks, and I know it goes by different names, but that's essentially, it's kind of like vanilla. It's got some caramel, and then it has little caramel cups in the ice cream, and those are
nice.
It's just great. I love the way it has a flavor pop to it as you eat it.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a salted caramel kind of guy myself. Put that on a waffle cone, and I love it. Especially like I'm thinking of the hot Houston summers that you're going through, Alex. So yeah, some ice cream flavors of ice cream to try, along with some strategies to help us all on the RevOps side. That's what we got in store today. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you to kind of move on to the next slide, talk about kind of game plan agenda for today, and then get into some of the topics for discussion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So like you mentioned, kind of covering off both the new business side of things and kind of the acquisition flow and kind of how to overcome pricing friction when it comes to closing a new biz deal. But then also kind of a continuation of that is what happens on the renewal side of things. And so we'll cover off some new trends and old foes that always tend to pop up as we're going through those different cycles related to closing a new biz deal, as well as a renewal. Talk about obviously some friction points that we always historically see on the renewal side, and then what tools there are in the toolbox, right, to help kind of address some of those obstacles and hurdles that we encounter, and how to implement those right in your process today. Awesome. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to talk through some of those trends that we see, kind of like I mentioned, the old foes, as well as those new trends as it comes to what helps support kind of closing a deal on the new business side.
Awesome, thanks. And honestly, this, to Alex's point earlier, is going to apply across the board, whether it's new business, existing. The motions are often very similar with maybe slight variations. But that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is every customer is different and we need to figure out how to go and ask sellers to do a whole bunch of stuff. We're asking them, especially when I think of something like Domo, a product that it can be almost everything to everyone. And so our sellers have to be able to do really effective discovery quickly so they're not wasting people's time. But then they also have to be able to get through an entire, sales cycle. They have to overcome things like the seller's deficit of all the skepticism that exists from all the prior conversations that, our customers have had. Um, then they've got to figure out how to get the customer like kind of prove to them that there is a solution. We're going to ask them for money to solve a problem that they're ready to spend money on. But that means we've got somebody who's kind of putting their neck on the line, putting their reputation out there to go spend money on our product. So we're asking sellers to do all these different things. They've got to do it across different size businesses, whether that's SMB or mid-market or even all the way up to large, enterprises. And then all along the way, we're asking them, oh, and make sure you enter this in Salesforce and make sure you go on forecast and make sure this is accurate. And then we're going to measure you here and all these different things, but also take good notes and then also log our use cases. And then there's so much stuff. It's like we got to make sure that if we're going to ask them to do those things, we're making it less of a roadblock for them so that they can get, they're not focused on us and the internal friction. They're not wrangling for, internal teams to do things, but that they're spending that time proving everything out with the customer and really focusing on that. So, I mean, that's one of the big things that I think that covers almost the entire gamut of it. Nobody internally ever wants to be the reason a deal didn't get done. That's kind of why I've got that Charlie Kelly down there, showing what sales does when it's time to explain why a deal didn't happen. You don't want to be the person that they are trying to blame, saying, "Oh, well, we couldn't get paper out, or we couldn't get terms right," and all those different things. So one of the big things that we've done is try to get the right tools out there for people to try and get the right tool for them at the right time. So it's easy for a seller, for a customer facing person to do things like create quotes. We've implemented CPQ. If they need to ask for help with something, we've implemented tools inside of Salesforce to make it easy for them to submit requests without having to like go all over the place searching for links and all these different things. And then they can kind of keep focused on the customer a little bit more.
Yeah. So I guess you talked about, well, I guess there's a lot of different variables in the mix there. So one, you talked about selling to all sizes of businesses, right? SMB to enterprise. And so I guess maybe first question is on the seller and the customer success side, do you have different teams and people that sell into or support and manage the relationships at Domo for each of those lines of business or different sizes, if you will?
Yeah, we do. And part of the way that got there is it is a little bit different motion. Like a lot of the
Yeah,
activities that have to take place along the way are the same, regardless of size. But with a smaller customer, you're likely dealing with the CEO, who might also be the CFO and the CRO and
yeah,
the head of sales and every single hat that they wear. And so there's fewer people involved in the sales cycle. You have somebody that has decision-making authority and signature authority right there. So you can have a lot quicker conversations and really get to the meat of what they need versus the other end of the spectrum being enterprise. A lot more people at the table, a lot more people have input. There's a lot longer approval cycles for all the different internal approvals they have to go through. And so we've got different teams that have specific skill sets of managing those different relationships and being able to kind of speak to those different stakeholders, especially at larger companies.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. So I guess first is not differentiating for just the sake of differentiating, but make sure that when you're evaluating the like having different teams or people supporting different lines of business, that there's truly different motions that go into each of those, right? And then
Yeah.
focus on uniquely solving the problems for them. So if that's the way you've got your team split, I guess one of the things I'm curious on, Kevin, you talked about a couple of different problems and challenges that pop up. Do you see those problems or issues being more prevalent in certain lines of business than others? Like, I'm curious, what are some of the differences that you've seen across, SMB to mid-market to enterprise sort of customers on the sales and the post-sale side?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that jump out to me, and I kind of started mentioning one of them earlier, and that is just the difference in kind of approval processes. So whether it's on the customer, like the pre-sales side, we're trying to get new business, or we've got somebody who's trying to get through a renewal, kind of on our renewals team. If we've got a lot more approvals we're going to have to get through, then we have to be thinking way ahead on timeline so that time doesn't become our only enemy trying to get something done. And that's a massive challenge, I think, for especially the larger like enterprises that have really rigorous approvals and kind of purchase cycles. It makes it kind of tough that way. But then on the smaller business side, you're dealing with different variables. So like on our mid-market, as an example, and this is kind of one of the reasons I know Alex, obviously, is through Capchase. We've got customers who know they have a problem. They're ready to go and solve it. They want to do something, and they don't even necessarily have tons and tons of approvals internally on their side, but maybe they have a cash flow challenge, and they come back and they ask us for quarterly payments. And then that happens, all of a sudden the sales rep is now almost pitted against everybody internally at Domo. So now they're going to our head of finance saying, hey, uh, ready to get this deal done. Customer just asked for this. They want a discount, they want quarterly payments. And what Captcha has kind of done, we had one recently where the rep is able to just go back and say, oh, cool. So what's your challenge? You can't pay for it all up front? No problem. We've got a flexible payment offering that looks like you're approved for. And now what we've done is they don't have a lot of approvals on their side they need to worry about at the customer. We've removed a whole bunch of extra approvals on our side internally that takes away some of that friction. And now the customer has options, and the rep can kind of be seen as the advocate there rather than somebody who's having to go and try and fight internally and get beat up for doing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see one why, especially right if you're talking SMB and even like mid-market customers today, cash flow and being able to spread out those payments over time, big I call it value add or something really important to them. If you're talking large enterprise, right, maybe less so there, but could still be important depending on how they budget and things like that. And then too, getting to your your meme at the bottom, right? You mentioned at the front, no one ever wants to be the reason why a deal doesn't get done, right? And so
Yep.
in that case, right, if it's like, hey, they're ready to go, they just need quarterly payments, like does finance want to be like, nah, sorry, can't do it. And then that be the reason, right? So you kind of eliminate all of those options there. Uh, I guess Alex, I'm curious on the CS or kind of post-sale perspective. Like Kevin's mentioned a bunch of things, especially for the different size teams and things on the sales side. But what do you see on this when you're looking at things in terms of supporting your customers on the customer success side?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the customer success side, at renewal time, pricing always becomes a conversation. It's, can be dependent on how much the customer has used the product, how well supported they felt. If there was a business value case that was made during the original sales cycle, kind of did we meet those expectations from a success criteria standpoint, right? And how do we measure up to kind of what value they felt they were going to get out of the product over the course of the last year or two. And so that's something that obviously comes up from a renewal standpoint. And, to Kevin's point, clearly communicating kind of what options there are upon renewal is really important in terms of, well, is there going to be an increase in price over upon renewal? And I think transparency is really key there. So that, similar to a customer seeing the AE as their champion for, the flexibility in terms of whether it's the pricing and packaging model, or, going, to internal battle, right, for flexible payment terms or whatever that might be. Same thing happens for the CSM, right, on the renewal side of things. And so, ensuring that those internal battles aren't repeating themselves, right, and the operational inefficiency isn't still there as kind of renewals come up, and the focus is really on solving the customer's pain or continuing to solve that and only improve is really a key focus on the CS side.
Yeah. One question. So one question for both of you, because we're talking a little bit about obviously like closing the initial customer and then renewing that customer. And so so Kevin at Domo, do you have is the original account executive involved in any of the renewal conversations that take place, or is that managed completely by like the account management customer success team?
Yeah, there's a little bit of both. We've actually got, in some cases, it is the original account executive who is involved that's working it. In the case where we've had, shuffle of accounts or different territory changes and things like that, it could be somebody else. But regardless, we're big advocates of that entire virtual account team working together on all
Yeah.
transactions. So one of the things that drives me crazy as a RevOps leader is when I hear I'll have maybe a CSM come to me and say, "Oh, well, I can't do anything about this because the AE won't let me in the deal." I'm like, what are you talking
Mm.
about? Like you guys are both managing the relationship. And then on the flip side, have an AE that comes and says, "Oh yeah, like this CSM won't join the meetings because we're talking about some hard stuff and I can't get a hold of them." I'm just like, all right, like this is ridiculous. This is not a good customer experience if they're not seeing their whole, account team.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about you, Alex? How do you all do things on the Capchase side?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we take the approach of, right, we're all on the same team. And the idea is that kind of everyone participating in that renewal cycle has some context as to how the customer got to where they are and that journey that they took to get there, right, with us. And so the idea is that, kind of when it comes to renewal, ensuring that everyone is involved, not to the point where we're creating confusion in terms of who's the point of contact, but that we can build a really good case to continue to solve, customer pain or iterate on kind of what was initially implemented for the customer and optimize there. And everyone's context helps with that, right? So, kind of, Kevin, to your point, we also treat everything on our side as a single account team. Everyone might have different roles, might have had a different role with a customer throughout the journey or process, but all of that is building to where they're at now, right? And how we can help them to improve in the future.
Yeah. And so talked a little bit about kind of a lot of times, again, the way that I'll look at these things, right? Since we're talking about how to overcome pricing friction within the closing and renewal process, kind of like, look at like the people, the process, and the technology. So we talked a little bit about the people just now. I guess I'm curious on the kind of more the process and technology side. Maybe Kevin, for you, like when it comes to process and um, again, like this idea of removing friction. Have you seen what, as it relates to closing new business or renewals, what are some things process wise that you've seen work or not work that you can share with the crew here of like, oh, these things, like you could start to evaluate, implement today, they've worked well. You might think you want to try these things, don't, because I've done them, they don't
Yeah.
work. Like, what are some of the process related things there?
Yeah, great question. And to kind of pile on to that intersection of the people, process, and tools, we try and always get the process defined first and get everybody in agreement on what that should be, so that when we go to purchase tools and implement tools, those tools are just enforcing that existing process. And one thing that happened to us when we implemented, like I mentioned, we have CPQ through Salesforce. The whole point of that was let's make it easy for our customer facing account executives and CSMs to go and create a quote. Let's try and automate some of that stuff so they're not having to create renewal quotes from scratch. They're not having to go and look in 12 places. It just automatically serves that stuff up. And that's been great. So getting information in front of people is key. But one of the other things that it was intended to do for us is enforce those internal policies, whether those are discounting policies, payment term policies, all that different stuff. And we met with all the different stakeholders internally painstakingly to define and gather all those requirements and really define how those approvals should work and what that process should be. And the interesting thing is, right after we went live, everything worked based on what was originally scoped. But we quickly started to learn some of the approvals that people had agreed to and said they absolutely had to have and needed to be able to stop deals for weren't really that. It was more, oh, well, I just kind of want to know that something's going on. But then they're just kind of
Mhm.
stamping approvals, and all of a sudden we're hearing sales teams say, well, so and so said that they don't really have to approve it. They just need to know something's going on. And so one of the things that we try and always live by is like, let's make quick changes there. So don't, from a being able to go and implement something today or take something away, it's don't overcomplicate a solution. So if we need to like right then and there say from now on, the deal desk team's just going to bypass that approval so people don't even get bothered by it until we can have the technology team go and remove it completely. And then we got that done. And this helped really curb some long-term issues because if you have approvals in there or pieces of process that aren't really applicable, people start to notice, hey, this doesn't really matter. And now they start to question all aspects of that process, and then it has some detrimental impacts to it later on. So that's kind of the main thing is don't wait too long to go and just make quick change, even if it's manual, to help address the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when as it relates to pricing, right? You always have, I mean, like you said, a lot of different people are in the loop on that or want to be in the loop on that. Finance, sales, right? If it's a current customer, customer success. But to your point, while everyone may say that they want like approval on that, doesn't mean they actually all need to approve. Also, if you have approval stages as it relates to pricing and discounts, you should look at those and actually see what the approval rate is. For example, if someone is 100% of the time approving things that they need to approve in order to go on to the next step in the process, then you should probably ask yourself, does that person really need to approve these? Because if they're approving 100% of things that go across their desk, like what's the point? Maybe they just care more about knowing the things that are going on than actually, saying yes or no. So yeah, that's a great point on that. I guess Alex, anything to add on that before we can kind of move on to the next slide? And I have one other question for y'all too.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a huge difference between approval and notification, right? And over architecting a solution where everything requires approval, um, you know, overall slows down a deal cycle in the process as well too. Not only is it creating extra steps, but if I'm a buyer and someone comes to me and says, "Oh, okay, well, let me see if I can get that approved internally," and it takes 5 days to get a response back because there's this crazy routing for approval, right? Now I've now lost confidence that, so someone from the seller side is going to follow up with me as a buyer and that that's actually feasible. So I think that's something that's really important to note is, who needs to be notified about what versus who actually needs to approve.
Yeah, and just to
Yeah.
pile back onto that, I quickly learned and changed my approach when talking to people internally when they would request certain things as part of the sales cycle approvals. That's the big question I ask them now is, do you need to be able to stop a deal? And that's been the one that gets them to step back and
Yeah.
go, well, I don't want to stop sales. Like that's sales leadership making that decision. I'm like, okay, then that's probably not an approval. Maybe we can work within our Domo tool to just provide you alerts that something is happening so you're aware of it before it closes. But if you're not looking to actually stop a transaction, you probably don't want to be in the chain.
Yeah. 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 That's a great way to frame it. Because yeah, if you ask someone, if you ask someone if they want approval, like they'll be like, yeah, like that sounds
Yep.
good. But if you ask someone if they want to have the power to stop a deal, that's when it's like, oh wow, I don't know about
Yep.
that. Like that's too much power. That's a heavy sword to yield. So I like that. So yeah, reframe those things. And then I guess last question, and I don't know if the next slide is relevant for this one, Alex, but because we have on here the meme there on like a customer wanting to move from like an annual to a monthly renewal. Kevin talked before even about like someone requesting something like quarterly payments. And so, there's like this notion of price and pricing and then payment terms, and obviously like pain. And I think a lot of times we just like always lump all of those things together and I don't know, maybe like try to solve them all at once. When in reality, things like discounts and stuff are not the same as, things like pay, like an annual commitment that you pay over the course of, monthly bills, right? Um, and so how should like people think about, I don't know if it's an objection that can come up or like when current customers want to talk about pricing adjustments for the next year on their renewal, or when new business, right, prospects want to talk about price as it relates to closing the current deal. What are some things that CS and sales can do and RevOps obviously that's supporting them to understand like truly like is someone objecting or talking about price as the issue, meaning the overall amount that they're going to pay, or do they really care about flexibility of payments, right? Being able to pay over, over monthly bills, quarterly bills, or just like the contractual commitment. Like how should people think about the differences between those two things?
Yeah, definitely. So there is a distinct difference between kind of the actual pricing and packaging, maybe bundling of a product versus, the frequency at which a customer is going to pay. So really, obviously, how often, and with what payment terms, right, does that fall under? So for example, you can combine net terms with payment frequency, right? And that's just another something that a buyer could also choose to negotiate on. So it's not necessarily just always about the discounting on the product itself, right, at the each individual product line item level. There are other, things that come up from a negotiation standpoint when you think about closing a deal related to payment terms and frequency. And so that clear, distinct, understanding the payment frequency and terms piece is really critical, at least from a CS and AE perspective, because it helps you kind of from a cash flow perspective on the buyer side. What can you do, right, from a negotiation standpoint to make it impossible for the buyer to say no to that deal, right? Price might be a little high. Okay, we don't offer discounts, but would it be easier for you if you pay monthly or quarterly and we take that total amount and peanut butter spread over, 12 or 24 months or whatever it might be. And so that's just another, tool that you can have in your tool belt to kind of get those last negotiation items that always seem to pop up when you see the final quote with the payment on there and the terms included, get it over the line.
Yeah. So question for you both. Jesse put this in about kind of discounting in like when prospects or customers are asking about discounting on price, it means they like it, but they want it for less versus wanting something like monthly or quarterly contracts or billing, meaning they kind of have plans or at least aren't necessarily thinking about it in the long run. And so I guess Alex, I'm curious for you because obviously like Capchase has a product right in this space where you like have right you offer solution to customers to essentially offer the ability to provide things like quarterly payments, monthly payments, but be able to kind of receive the dollars up front. So removing that friction. I know I've experienced things in the past where I've sold, call it 12-month contracts with people and, we've agreed to quarterly payments, right? And then, they get to like the last quarter, right? And they don't plan to renew. And so they're like, like we just want to cancel early. And obviously they haven't paid that last quarterly payment. And so on the like on my side, you're kind of in the position of like, well, what do you do? So I'm curious, like you've obviously seen this a bunch in the wild. Like what have you seen, like even with just your customers or even like offering a solution like this based on data that you have of like, is there a correlation there? Like do people, when they're asking for things like monthly or quarterly billing and some of those shorter commitments, does that typically mean they're just going to churn faster? Or is it truly mean they just want more flexibility in payment? Or is it some, I don't know, some mix somewhere in between, maybe?
Yeah, I actually think it's so kind of based on the data we have, it actually is a mix of in between. And it almost comes down to kind of the industry vertical that the buyer is in sometimes. And what I mean by that is, if you certain industries will handle cash balances on a weekly basis, right? And so if you think about, for example, the retail sector where that's typically the case, flexible payment terms are, potentially much more appealing to a buyer in that vertical, versus, businesses that and industries that might, look at things on a, more on a quarter over quarter basis. And so there isn't necessarily always a direct correlation, but if you kind of think of it across industry, we do see some correlation between, well, I'll commit to monthly and quarterly knowing that I have an out after 12 months, right? And then that's when kind of the CSM and really the entire account team come into play to see, what can be done to either help prevent that customer from churn, or even if it is a downsell, right, from an NRR perspective, that's better than a full churn, right? So I would say it's a mix.
Yeah. And Kevin, I know like you're on the sales ops side and you've seen kind of, I know you all are use the Capchase product for this. So you've probably seen like the before and the after. Do you have any either data points or like opinions, even if it's anecdotally, like on stuff that you've seen or experienced yourself of like, when customers are looking for flexible payment terms, how is that different from price? And is there, any considerations there for folks as it relates to future renewals that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, anecdotally speaking, and I agree with I think Jesse's main statement of, discounting is they want a thing, but they're like, hey, we can't afford this. This doesn't fit in the cost envelope. Versus maybe they're going to be a flight risk. And I take it a step kind of higher up. And this is something that we talk about a lot with the sellers is have you sold the value throughout the process? Because throughout the entirety of the sales process or a renewal negotiation, you should kind of understand where the customer is going to get value, what that's going to be worth to them, and then any other kind of signal that maybe there's going to be a problem. So I would think of something like somebody wanting an opt-out as more of a kind of red flag there, that maybe they don't really feel like they can maintain this. But if it truly is a cash flow problem, and this is where the rep really has to do good discovery, is be able to solve the right problem. So if it's cash flow, great, we got a solution for that. If it is
Yeah.
the annual budget, regardless of when the cash goes out the door, let's go talk about that piece separately. But regardless of where you end up, you've done all that work throughout the sales cycle. And a lot of times the price and all the payment stuff comes at the very end. You kind of go from this like high note of, oh, we're going to solve your problem. We're so excited to get it going. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's the implementation plan. You don't want that whole thing to get railroaded because you're tied up talking about the payment terms or small discounts or things like that. So the better job the rep can kind of do on the front end of it, of sussing that stuff out, the better judgment they can make when it's time to offer something, whether it's a flexible payment option or a discount, to make sure they're solving the actual problem so that the customer is not going to come back and ask for something else.
Yeah. And do you have your team bring up pricing and payment terms and stuff kind of upfront early? So at least there's like some indication of like, hey, here, like whether it's people asking in one of the very first meetings, or do you kind of, I'll say, save it to the end? I know I've seen folks go both ways on this, where they're like, hey, I try to make sure that people know what to expect in terms of like pricing budget, like upfront, so that it's not a surprise, and that, like you said, you don't go from like the high note you're on of selling value and talking about how great it's going to be when we solve all your problems, to the low note of being like, like I need a 25% discount in monthly billing in order to be able to afford this. So any specific ways on the enablement side for your sales team that you've seen things work better there?
Yeah, we want them to bring it up when it makes sense at the right time. And sometimes that will be like if a customer right out of the gate is like, before we go further, I need to even know if like I can
Yeah.
afford this. What does it cost? We give them coaching and a lot of training on how to kind of navigate that to understand what the real question is. But sometimes that means right up front, and Capchase has done a good job for us of starting to give us the ability to see early on in a sales cycle whether or not a customer would be approved, so that if it's the right time,
Mm.
the rep can pull that tool out of the toolbox and say, hey, just so you know, we do have that flexible payment option. It looks like you are approved. And now they can kind of pivot back into talking about the solution.
Yeah.
And then in other cases, it will be later in the process when the customer finally brings it up, or the rep has to kind of drag it out as they start talking about some of those advanced stage things. Then that may be the best time, and we hope that they bring it up at the right time. I'm sure if I go listen to a lot of the recordings, we're going to find a mixed bag of execution.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so I think on the next slide, Alex, we talk a little bit about net revenue retention, and kind of the value of measuring this on the CS side. I know I've seen a lot of things, especially like on LinkedIn and elsewhere lately, about a lot of these companies, software companies too, lately that have had, tremendous NRR numbers, right? The like Snowflake, right, who had like something crazy like 153%, and like all these other kind of software companies that just had some incredible NRR numbers, and basically all of them have gone down. Still are mostly above 100%, but some of them have dipped below 100%. And so talk a little bit about, from your perspective, like on the CS side, why NRR is king here.
Yeah, definitely. So right, if you think about the journey with the customer and kind of everything that happens over the course of their contract, it's really kind of leading up to that renewal. And so a lot of kind of what we do at Capchase is the tooling, and kind of notifications both internally and externally as we start to lead up to that actual renewal. And so, what does that mean? Clearly, communicating any pricing details with the customer earlier in the renewal cycle has proven to be beneficial. Just because, if there is an adjustment that's needed from a budget perspective, or if there is going to be another round of kind of negotiation as it comes to renewal, that upfront transparency gives yourself more runway and time to have those conversations. And even, if value needs to be resold, doing that as well too at that time. Um, and so, kind of all of that, you can have a great NPS score where the customer really enjoys using the product, but maybe it's not necessarily mission critical. And so, by the time you get to your renewal, if you haven't been transparent with the customer, or you haven't been in contact with them, or you don't understand how they're using the product, and you haven't done your forecasting around that, right? That's when we start to see the drop in NRR. There's obviously other external factors, kind of, if you think about from an economic kind of macroeconomic standpoint, right? I think some of the NRR drop we're seeing, at least kind of based on the data that we have, is, if a solution isn't mission critical or it didn't provide all of the value that was initially sold, that could be a drop off there. And I think the key thing to think about is, is there value in having conversations with the customer in terms of, okay, it might be a downsell, right? But they're still a customer versus a full churn altogether, right? And so those are some things that kind of, from a renewal standpoint, that we consider on our side, and look at it when it comes to thinking about NRR being king.
Yeah. So so I guess I'm curious because I think what I find interesting is obviously the topic of our talk today is how to overcome pricing friction to improve the closing and renewal process. And then on here you have something that says friction is okay as long as it's being spent on the right thing. And I know I've seen this elsewhere before where, like you're kind of thoughtfully and intentionally, I won't say make things hard, right? But like you insert that extra step because of the outcome that you're looking to drive. So as it relates to customer success and NRR here, what are some of those areas, or what are some of those specific things that you've seen work where it's like, hey, we're going to implement this extra step or this piece of friction here. We're doing it on purpose because this is the outcome that you're looking to drive. Like, what are some of those examples that you can give to people here?
Yeah, I think one of the examples is actually opening up the conversation when it comes to, payment terms. A lot of the time, budgets are cut, and we see customers come to us and say, hey, we can't really maybe afford, or it's not in our budget for next year for this solution. And okay, that's fine. What can we do? What conversations and renegotiations can we have? Which really introduces an extra step as opposed to, the customers just renewing into kind of the existing terms to help them afford the solution. right, and optimize around that. And so similarly to kind of what Kevin mentioned before, right, the idea of how can we break those payments up into cycles that make sense for the customer, whether that's monthly or quarterly. The other thing too is thinking about, okay, well, you might have gone over budget this year and there's only 2 months left in the year. How can we build, right, a payment plan that makes sense for with the customer for the customer? So maybe upon renewal, the first 2 months, the payments are slightly lower, and then the new budget kicks into the new year. And all of those conversations obviously take time and introduce friction, but ultimately get to you to the point where the customer feels well supported in the renewal cycle and also gets you to kind of that 100+% NRR number.
Yeah. Kevin, on the sales side, or I guess I'm curious. I know we're talking about NRR here. So as it relates to expansions and call it upsells, at Domo, do you all have, does the original account executive handle those? Does the CS or account management team handle those? Who's responsible for like closing any of the upsell opportunities that you all might have?
Yeah, that's typically something that the AE, the account executive, will kind of be quarterbacking and driving. Obviously, we want them to have their CS counterpart involved as well, and we try and set up the incentive structure so that both people are incented to kind of do the same behavior. So we're not pitting them, against each other,
Yeah,
and that way they can kind of triangulate around like, hey, what challenges are we facing with the customer, and if we're going to grow it, what specifically are we growing it for? What use case are we introducing where they're going to be able to go get additional value, and uh and then if as the reps are working those, that's when we have seen some upsells obviously come through that end up getting the flexible payments through Capchase.
yeah. And then is the CS team the one responsible for identifying the upsell opportunity, or who typically is responsible for creating the opportunity in the first in Salesforce, for example? Like who says like, oh, there's an opportunity here to sell more or to sell this additional product? Is it CS or is it the sales team?
Yeah, it can actually be either, but most of the time it's going to be the sales team if we're talking about upsells or
Yeah,
converting to different products and things like that. So they're definitely driving a lot of that. And there are times though where, CS is maintaining that relationship and there is this focus on NRR for them big time when they do find things through their check-ins, say, hey, you know what? We actually have some new functionality that can help solve that. Let me get you in touch with the account executive and see if there's a good fit.
yeah. And then same question for you as I asked Alex before. Within the that upsell process, or even I guess just the sales new business process in general, again, we talk so much about removing friction, removing steps. Are there any points along the journey for either closing new business or driving any of those upsells or expansions at Domo where you've intentionally inserted like an extra step or some friction into the process to drive a certain outcome?
Yeah, there is, and if I mean, we don't want to have friction with the customer as much as possible. I think there are times, though, and Alex kind of mentioned that where it makes sense where we have to, we don't want to just be like being run over every single time. Like we need to be able to have good dialogue and conversations. But from an operational perspective, I mean, a lot of people initially saw CPQ as something that was extra friction, and then over time we've been able to show how it can accelerate a lot of things. And obviously, it's a continuous improvement process. I'm sure if you went and asked people, they'd say, "Oh, I'm still getting roadblocked on things." But that's where we say if we're going to introduce friction on something like payment terms as an example, and making those go through extra approvals, we want to know that the outcome of that is going to have a positive benefit for the company. So if we're not saying no, we're saying we need to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row and you're not just asking for it. So as long as they can justify it well, then great, let's remove that friction. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned kind of off the top with the rep being able to have that flexible payment option that they can bring out at the right time, then it avoids a lot of that internal friction because now they don't have to go and ask for that approval at all. They're able to just run it through Capchase.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, remove friction obviously where it makes sense. But uh, keep it right where it should be.
Yeah, if
And
you're gonna have
where
it,
you
make
need it.
sure you're getting something very intentional out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it kind of goes back to, we're talking about like the friction involved in all these layers of the approval process, right? If someone's approving something 100% of the time, do they really
Yep.
need to have the power to stop the deal, or do they just care about getting notified? So, yeah, that all makes sense. Alex, I think we had one or two more slides, so maybe go to the next one and talk a little bit about some of these different elements, right? Of like product versus support versus payment.
Yeah. Yeah, and so kind of, if we think about everything that could potentially be a friction point, right? This is just a sample size of everything that, potentially comes up as we think about a deal cycle, whether it is on the new business side, it's an expansion, or it truly is a renewal, right? And so kind of, going into, every different cycle, I always try to think to myself, well, what do I, doing my homework kind of ahead of a renewal coming up, or ahead of any type of expansion conversation, of what do I know kind of based on the conversations I've had with the customer, where they're at as a business. So the information that exists out there just on them as a business, and the convert right in the asks that they've had over the course of the relationship, whether it's just starting on the new biz side, or it's something where it's an ongoing relationship and this is a renewal. What are the different elements that they're going to potentially bring up, and kind of try to negotiate on, and how can we eliminate those items out of the gate, right? So what's in my control, and what tooling and power do I have to be able to say, well, we're not going to have to either rehash or talk about from a support perspective what's included. Or on the payment side, right, have to, like Kevin mentioned, go through all of the internal approval processes and slow down the cycle to, get approval around offering monthly or quarterly, or even net 30 or 60 terms, right? um, and so kind of these are all the things that kind of I do, on when we do on our side at Capchase from an account planning perspective, is what possibly could come up with the customer, and what do we have in our tool belt to be able to address that, right? And some of it is on the RevOps front around kind of the automation, especially if I think about like our renewal pipeline, making sure that customers are getting notifications, but that we have notifications internally, to be able to, talk to, the usage of the product with the customer, or to be able to go back and look at a business value case and ensure that the buyer, or our customer, right, we've kind of checked all the boxes related to the value that we originally sold them. And so really this is just kind of summary of what we talked about in terms of what are the different elements to help us get that deal over the line and reduce the friction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, it makes sense. I mean, there's price is one big component, right? But you talk about payment terms, what support options, product. There's just a lot of moving parts there. And I think on the next slide you have, as we kind of wrap up, some of the key takeaways and tactics from both you and Kevin that you want to leave folks with today. So let's talk through some of these.
Yeah, definitely. So if we think about kind of the first thing here, a lot of I always notice there's a ton of rigor around, especially kind of the new biz pipeline as well as expansion pipeline. But when it comes to renewals, that's also something that is critical and paramount in terms of making sure that no one's surprised, right? Both internally and externally, that a renewal is upcoming. And I think something that's really quick and easy to do is kind of automatically create a renewal opportunity, right? When you close a new biz deal. And that you've got some notifications kind of in advance leading up to maybe 120 days, 90 days, 60 days, 30 days out, that go to your entire account team, internally, to make sure, one, that everyone's on the same page, but two, that kind of as we reach all of those different milestones leading up to a renewal, that there's action, that the internal teams and sellers can take, to set both them and the buyer up for success when it does come time for that actual pen to paper renewal.
Yeah. Yeah. The notification stuff, especially the time bound things, because again, that stuff easy to get set up, super valuable because again, especially when you're managing how many different relationships and your CSMs have all this other stuff going on, right? Like it's just natural that things can get lost, or you can forget about certain things. So yeah, those alerts might sound super simple, but can be super valuable to just propel the right action at the right time.
Yeah, information at the right time is what makes information valuable. If it's
Yeah.
always, late, doesn't really help. And that's one thing that we've been able to do. We've been able to automate the renewal opportunity and quote creation. But even before we had that, we were able to use our own Domo product to go and keep track of the renewal pipeline and know that, 90 days ahead of time, we need to make sure people were already looking at everything because the invoice is going to go out soon. And keeping track of their customers and notifying them when something didn't happen, and giving them a place where they can see all of that in one spot. And our CS team has a great place that they can go to see their whole book of business, all the renewals for this quarter, the next quarter, and then they can even go all the way out into the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. And so kind of if we think about the last two items here, confusing price with payment terms is obviously something we see, as we think about new biz and renewals, especially when it comes to friction, right? A lot of the time there's a convolution of, well, I want a discount, but that actually might not address, the issue at hand, where the buyers determine that they're going to get value out of the product, that they know that they need it and want to move forward, but just need a more incremental form of paying over time. And then obviously understanding if price is a problem, like Kevin mentioned, being able to go back and refocus on the value. And if there, was a miss there, maybe doing additional discovery or selling additional value there as well too.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I think we talked about a lot of these things kind of throughout, but like I said, I love the automations around renewal op and notifications with the right information at the right time for your team. Also, like we talked about throughout, don't confuse price with payment terms. Things like contractual commitment, monthly billing, quarterly billing are not the same as discounts or just generally price. So make sure your sellers and your CS folks are enabled with the right information to and the right training to tease those things out. And then again, you've got solutions like Capchase Pay, you've got other processes and things that you can do to kind of solve for those problems, but make sure you look at them separately. And then, yeah, I think the last piece I look at, solving those operational burdens for your sellers, a great way to eliminate friction, but then like we said, keep call it the burdens or the friction points where you need to drive specific outcomes as well. So again, just make sure you're being thoughtful and intentional about that, right? That you're not really taking anything for granted. And so in the last couple of minutes here, I guess I'll just ask, maybe Kevin, we'll start with you. Any what's the one big takeaway, closing remarks, things you want to leave folks with today?
Yeah, the one of the biggest things for us recently has been and this is hard for an operations person to say, but don't be afraid of a short-term, manual stopgap if it is going to help remove the pain from sellers. We're going through that a little bit with right now as we've moved to a consumption-based pricing model. And we've been able to get all the different departments aligned internally. That's like, yeah, we're going to have the automation. It's going to eventually be there. But until it is, let's all just get on the phone and start knocking down these problems so that we don't have our sellers looking dumb in front of customers and losing, faith in all of the, data that they're reporting on.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's like the classic meme of like, could I spend 20 minutes right now doing this manually, or could I
Yep.
spend the next 4 hours trying to figure out how to automate it unsuccessfully? It's like,
Right.
I don't know why we all want to do the latter, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and I even still have all of these things to this day, like these monthly things that I'm still doing. I'm like, man, I know this could be automated, but I'm just going to knock it out in the next 20 minutes because otherwise it's just going to take too much time. So completely agree. And what about you, Alex? Closing remarks, what are the last things you want to leave folks with today?
Yeah, I think something that's kind of key, right? And I know we touched on this point. Um, as we think about the entire, customer journey, and what's needed, right, to support a customer, from the initial close of the deal all the way, through renewal, and past that, is really kind of, to Kevin's point, having the right information at the right time, right? That helps you, relay that information to your buyers, set them up for success, and also internally, right, can allow you to also kind of optimize, around kind of how you're operating as teams and supporting one another as well too. If everyone has the right information and is on the same page, right, typically the buyer notices that as well too. In all the conversations that they have, kind of everyone's saying the same thing, and the buyer feels well supported.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we went from cookie dough ice cream and bunny track ice cream to improving and eliminating friction from the closing and renewal process. And now we are here at the end. So I want to say thank you to Alex and Kevin for dropping some knowledge, for sharing your favorite ice cream flavors with us, and for just being kind of totally open and transparent with all of the items that we went through today. Very, very helpful, super appreciative. Everyone who showed up and is still there, thank you very much for listening in as well. Like David said in the chat, we will have a survey that should pop up as soon as you exit the webinar. If you can fill that out, let us know what you thought of the event today. That would be great. We love all the feedback we can get. But with that, I will let you all run since we're at the top of the hour. So have a good rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you all on the flip side. So take care, everybody.